Who has never heard about the tragic death of a famous queen, Cleopatra? We are all familiar with how she committed suicide by snakebite in 30 before Christ, cutting her life short before she even reached her 40th birthday. A death with all the elements of an ancient tragedy. But is that what really happened? Were ancient narratives reliable at all? Upon closer inspection on some accounts of her death, one starts to wonder. Date, fewer than a dozen Greek and Roman authors have written about the Queen's last moments before she chose to kill herself. Her options were indeed limited. It was either suicide or a terrible death at the hand of her enemy, Roman general Octavian. She knew he hated her so much that he intended to take her back to Rome, where he would parade her through the street in chains. After publicly humiliating her, she suspected he would then execute her, to the great delight of the Roman elite, who considered her as a dangerous and depraved woman. Of all the authors who wrote about her death, only one actually lived during her time, Strabo, who wasn't even an historian but a geographer. And at the time he wrote about the Queen's final hours, she had already been dead for at least 20 years or as many as 40 years. And this is what he had to say. A short time afterwards, however, she also put an end to her life secretly, in prison by the bite of an asp or, for there are two accounts, by the application of a poisonous ointment. This means that already back then, no one was certain about the circumstances leading to the Queen's death. Was it an asp or was it poison? But the tragic death of someone as famous as Cleopatra could not disappear into oblivion. Soon, various authors started coming up with their own versions, and this is how the fantasy quickly got out of hand. Famous Greek biographer Plutarch wrote of the Queen's tomb in one of his works dedicated to her third husband, Mark Antony. But she fled for refuge into her tomb and let fall the drop's door, which were made strong with bolts and bars. Then she sent messengers to tell Antony that she was dead. Having learned then that Cleopatra was alive, Antony eagerly ordered his servants to raise him up, and he was carried in their arms to the doors of her tomb. Cleopatra, however, would not open the doors, but showed herself at a window from which she let down ropes and cords. To these, Antony was fastened, and she drew him up herself. Plutarch's rather long account on Mark Antony's death is absolutely mind-blowing. He has such wild ideas that it reads more like a theatre play than a compilation of solid facts. It almost defies logic when you read how Mark Antony botched his own suicide and what happened when he then headed to the tomb of his wife Cleopatra. When she saw that he was dying, she refused to open the door but preferred to bring him inside by pulling him up with ropes and cords. Plutarch's description of Cleopatra's tomb follows exactly the same logic. When were the tombs of Egyptian rulers ever fortified, and why would they be? And since when did mausoleums have drop doors? Why would anyone need a window in a tomb? In Plutarch's completely fabricated description, the tomb sounds more like a strong tower and should really not be taken seriously. A 9th century Arabic manuscript, Hagia Sophia 3590, provides a translation of a work titled Antiriac to Piso and fills in the gap of his treatise written in the 3rd century. In it, we learn that she, meaning Cleopatra, took the snake and attached it to her left breast, knowing that the heart was on the same side. The snake bit her and she died instantly. Of all the countless versions of a death, this was the only account that mentioned a bite to the queen's breast instead of a arm. Ironically, it's the most popular version people know of, and it's also the version that has inspired Renaissance artists the most. But two details contradict this theory. First, how did an author living in the 3rd century, meaning practically 250 years after Cleopatra's death, gain access to information that all the other ancient authors never knew? Second, the same author even offers a different theory about the queen's death. And those say that she bit her own arm wide and deep, and after doing this, got the haste poison brought to her in some vessel and poured it into the wound, and so after it had been given to her without the guard noticing, she peacefully died. The author of this treatise also could not help adding his personal touch. In this new version, he changed the name of the two servants that his predecessors mentioned, added grapes to the basket of figs that other authors wrote about, and turned the ass into a cobra. So many details are given that it becomes clear that this version is a more artistic license than historical fact. Following Strabo's example, other historians born after Cleopatra's death all related the version of an asp that killed the queen and possibly her servants. Among them are Roman historian Velleius Paterculus, born 11 years after Cleopatra's death, Greek historian Plutarch, born 76 years after, Roman historian Suetonius, born a century after, and Roman historian Cassius Dio, born almost 200 years after. But this version is not valid for several reasons. A bite from an asp is seldom deadly. Most of the time, the account mentions two of the queen's servants dying with her, but no matter how big a snake gets or what species it was, no snake has enough venom to kill 3 adult humans. Asps measure between 50 and 70 centimeters and can grow up to 90 centimeters. How did such a huge reptile manage to sneak into a fruit basket or a vase, depending on the version, and pass the guard without them noticing? Only the version by Roman historian Florus, born 100 years after the death of Cleopatra, seems plausible when he reported that she then put snakes to her veins and slipped into death as if into sleep. But again, it's hard to imagine how the queen managed to get her hands on several snakes without alerting the guards. Historian Cassius Dio, 200 years after the death of Cleopatra, developed another theory that Plutarch had very briefly mentioned. She has smeared a pin with which she was wont to fasten her hair, with some poison possessed of such a property that in ordinary circumstances it would not injure the body at all, but if it came into contact with, even a drop would destroy the body very quickly and painlessly, and that, previous to this time, she had worn it in her hair as usual, but now had made a slight scratch on her arm and had dipped the pin into the blood. Except that this theory of a poison pin is hard to back up, because if such a deadly and fast-acting poison did indeed exist, first, it should have a name by now, but historians have always referred to it as simply poison. Second, Cleopatra would have used it on herself before instead of after being captured by Octavian. And if a queen scratched her skin with a pin until it drew blood, it doesn't exactly sound like she died quietly and painlessly. One more inconsistency. There is a simple rule that all modern historians know. Too much detail is a telltale sign that an account is untrue. The following is an example taken from the life of Antony by Plutarch. When they, meaning Cleopatra's guard, opened the doors, they found Cleopatra lying dead upon a golden couch, dressed in royal state. And of her two women, the one called Iras was dying at her feet, while Henrion, already tottering and heavy-handed, was trying to arrange the diadem which encircled the queen's brow. Then somebody said in anger, "A fine deed this, Henrion?" "It's indeed most fine," she said, "and befitting the descendant of so many kings." Not a word more did she speak, but fell there by the side of the couch. The golden couch, the names of both servants, and the recreated dialogue are just some of many examples. If these facts were completely made up, why would the account on Cleopatra's death be considered more credible, especially since there have been almost 10 different versions since Antiquity? If there are so many mysterious about her death and so many divergent versions, it's precisely because we don't know anything about it. Octavian must have been mad that he was denied his victory over Cleopatra and the chance to chain her up, so it's understandable that he had nothing to say about her death. It's also highly unlikely that his servants spread rumors. Octavian moved in high society circles in Rome, and ancient historians were part of the elite. So if anything newsworthy about Cleopatra's death was leaked at the time, there is no doubt that Octavian's contemporary historians would have seized the opportunity to report it. However, historians of that era were sworn to secrecy. Caution is required when relying on belated accounts of events, and all the more so when ancient historians were paid to write them. This was because the truth did not matter as much as the satisfaction of the person who hired them. If Cleopatra's own contemporaries did not really know how she died, why would their successors be closer to the truth? But no one can keep quiet about the mysterious death of a woman like Cleopatra for long, and like every celebrity death under tragic circumstances, the rumors take on a life on their own. Some things never change.